The War of 1812, a war that historian Donald Heckley has referred to as the Forgotten War, is marking its 200th anniversary this year. Unfortunately, there has been very little commemoration for the War of 1812, besides at places of war-related significance. The causes of the War of 1812 are complex and often only vaguely understood by many Americans. Perhaps commemoration of the war is so muted because Americans typically do not recall its defining events or the reasons the war was fought as they do with the American Revolution, Civil War, or World War II. In 1812, the British and the French empires were currently at war with one another. During this time, the US government was split between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanted to continue to trade and improve political relations with the British Empire. The Anti-Federalists, however, favored the French Empire over the British. The Anti-Federalists spoke out against the British disruption of trade to France and also the impressment of American sailors. Ultimately, the continued impressment of American sailors and the continual raids on American merchant ships by the British forced President James Madison to declare war on the British. The War of 1812 was marked by a series of indecisive victories for both the British and the Americans. These included Captain Oliver Perry's victory over the British at the Battle of Lake Erie, where he spoke his famous words, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." The Americans also captured and burned down the city of York, to which the British retaliated by burning down the White House in 1814. By December of 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, effectively declaring a conclusion to the war. However, due to slow communication, battles continued to rage on for several months. Andrew Jackson's monumentous victory at the Battle of New Orleans was not achieved until January of 1815. However, the War of 1812 left behind more than just battlefields. Andrew Jackson's fame at the Battle of New Orleans would eventually propel him to become President of the United States. Also, Oliver Perry has essentially been canonized as a saint of the infant American Navy. During the Battle of Baltimore, Francis Scott Key, inspired by Fort McHenry's continual resistance against British naval bombardment, wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, which became our national anthem. However, since the War of 1812 was such a significant national event, it was impossible for it not to affect Shippensburg. When President Madison received congressional support for his declaration of war against Britain, the country called upon the state governors to organize militia. Pennsylvania Governor Simon Snyder accepted the service of the Shippensburg Militia. This group of Shippensburg militiamen, known as the Shippensburg Troop of Light Horse, led by Captain David Duncan, marched 350 miles to Buffalo to invade Canada along with other Pennsylvania militiamen. However, the militia moving forward faced many problems, such as bad press, low supplies, and other issues that Dr. Stephen Berg will mention.
Many of the militias enlisted for only 30 or 90 days, and a number of them refused to leave American soil, which turns out to be a real problem when your goal is to invade a foreign country.
To top it all off, the U.S. forces sent to invade Canada were decisively defeated at the Battle of Queenston Heights. The war, however, was not over for the Shippensburg men, though. In 1814, word of the burning of Washington, D.C. forced the Shippensburg militia to be called up to duty again. This time, the militiamen were called for to defend their country. Some of the Shippensburg militiamen, such as Private James Kelso, a lad of only 22 years, were called upon to guard the DuPont powder mills at Wilmington, Delaware. Paul Martin, a son of an American Revolutionary War veteran, was a Shippensburg resident called upon to defend Baltimore. However, his fame did not end with his service during the War of 1812.
After the war, he returned to the community and contributed significantly. He owned 2 iron furnaces here in town. He also operated a team of freight horses that hauled goods between Pittsburgh and Baltimore. And he built a substantial house at the corner of Prince Street and King Street, where he lived until the end of his life.
As residents of Shippensburg, we should be proud to have such men as local heroes. Their service to our country shaped their own families and in turn, their communities. It seems only right that in 2012, 200 years after the War of 1812, we should commemorate our community's involvement in this national turning point. This important bicentennial should not pass without a renewed commitment to remembering this forgotten war. So what can we do in Shippensburg to commemorate and preserve the memory of the War of 1812?
I think one of the most important things is that we as a community need to remember these events. So much has been forgotten and overlooked over the years. And so I think an important part is telling the stories, remembering the men who served, the impact on our local communities, and I think especially taking efforts to preserve the history, whether it's teaching it to our kids in school or preserving places like the God's Acre Cemetery where those veterans rest.
We do well to remember what Captain David Duncan's gravestone says, "The just man walketh in his integrity." May we walk in the integrity of the dozen men buried at God's Acre Cemetery. These local heroes' final resting places are scattered throughout Shippensburg, but no place deserves more mentioning than God's Acre Cemetery, the site of a dozen 1812 veterans' graves.